Many of us, feel as though this is the worst time to ever live, even though it's the best time to ever live by most metrics. Who am I? What does my life mean? What matters to me? Why does it matter to me? How do I live an authentic life? How do I translate my values into action? Who do I love? How do I love? These are questions that every human asks in some way or another.
Not everyone has the privilege to slow down and reflect. For some people, survival is what takes priority. They're trying to pay their bills and feed their families. So how can we make room for personal growth while also acknowledging the reality of our circumstances?
Yeah, just the act of asking the question, who am I believe, is what it means to have a spiritual life. The number one thing that scientists tell us will make us feel as though we're thriving and flourishing is not meditation, not prayer, not hiking. Do you know what it is?
Hi everyone, welcome back to another episode of Ease. Today we're having a really insightful and deep conversation with Dr. Soni. Dr. Soni, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you both for having me.
We really wanted to just start simple and easy, and we wanted to almost address something that a lot of young people feel, especially in your early 20s, which is such a pivotal time in a person's life. You're leaving your childhood, your adolescence, everything that you knew, the structure that you knew, and then you're kind of thrown into this new world. Mm-hmm. I feel like a lot of young people feel this pressure and this stress of having this structure that society kind of made for us and built for us. And it's okay, you go to school and then you graduate and then you go to college and then from there you get a job and you start the workforce and then you get married and you're supposed to have kids. And there's all these expectations of how you should live your life, when it almost feels like being a human being is messy and there's so much in the world to explore. There's so much to explore within us. So how can we as young people view this structure? What's a healthy way of viewing this structure?
So I see this all the time at a school like USC. As you can imagine, we have 50,000 young people, and many of them are there because they've done everything they were told to do. They've excelled in every exam, in every class, they've jumped through every hoop, and they were told, if you do X, Y, and Z, then you can have A, B, and C. If you get good grades, if you work hard, if you get good test scores, then you can have the job, the career, the life, right? Mm-hmm. And so everything is framed in a pretty transactional way, and yet when students do all these things and they come out on the other side of it, sometimes they feel empty, or that they were sold this raw bill of goods, that they did what they were told they should do in order to have a sense of thriving or flourishing or purpose in their life, but they don't feel it because there's a disconnect between the fact that they did it and where they find themselves. I think part of it is just the way we were raised in the United States. We're mostly raised focused on performance or outcome. So much of our identity is based on, I will be good enough if X happens, or I will be worthy enough if Y happens. Our own identity is conditioned upon some outcome or something else happening. Oftentimes that outcome or that something else happening is what other people think should happen, as opposed to what we think should happen. My sense is that because we're so focused on performance or outcome, and we all are, you wouldn't be the incredible podcasters that you are if you weren't hyper focused on achievement and doing something that had a particular outcome. And yet, if that's the only way we approach life, then we're just running from goal to goal. And what happens is that life happens in between those goals. Life happens in the journey, not in the destination. Life happens in the process, not in the goal. This idea of shifting one's mindset from a performance-based identity, which is mostly focused on outcomes, to a purpose-based identity, which is mostly focused on process. We don't always control the outcomes. And the anxiety of the world comes from the stuff we don't control. The things that keep us up at night comes from the stuff we don't control. But we can control the process and the journey and the purpose. That's what gets us up in the morning. And that's what we do control. Because if you're just first I have to go to high school, then I have to go to college, then I have to go get the job, then I have to get married, you're just checking off these boxes in your life. And before you know it, you're at the end of your life. And you've just been looking forward. You haven't actually been present in the journey that is life.
Yeah.
I often think that we're blinded by the destination. The beauty is actually in the walking. And it's hard to do because we've been conditioned a particular way to always look for what's next. And that's what makes us who we are. And we're not good enough unless we get to what's next. But part of learning is unlearning, right? And part of, I think, the journey to being the people we want to be is unlearning the things that no longer serve us well.
Yeah. Something that we relate to is we love like putting together like at the beginning of the year a vision board of what we want to achieve or like what we're striving for, because it kind of gives us direction as to where we want to go. So I see the benefit in setting goals, but I think there's almost like an obsession with just getting the end result that you don't really appreciate the process, which is what makes people feel unfulfilled, because once you're at the destination, it's like, now what?
Yep. It's just on to the next thing and on to the next. You don't even enjoy it because then you're stressed about the next one and the next one.
Yeah.
So listen, it's a balance. You can't achieve what you've achieved in your life if you didn't set goals. We should set goals. We should have aspirations. We should be moving in a particular direction. But can we do it in a way that we don't just have these blinders on that sort of disallows us from engaging whatever the universe wants to sort of send our way? How do we move forward but still be open to the possibilities of what's ahead? That's a bit of a balance. I think we have to do that dance for basically our life. But when you're goal setting, I think it's important to also think about what kind of goals you're setting. Mostly we set these goals that are, often professionally based. But what if your goal was do things I love with the people I love? I can't imagine, as I get older, I really think like the meaning of life is doing things you love with the people you love. And yet all of my professional goals disallow me from doing that. What if one of your goals was, I'm going to call up people for no reason at all? Just to tell them that I'm thinking about them. What if one of your goals was, I'm going to be more mindful in the mornings, in my part of my morning routine? What if one of your goals was, I'm going to practice a random act of kindness for someone I don't know? Those are also aspirational goals. Those are also goals that should mean as much to us as getting an A or passing a test or getting an internship or getting in the sorority or the fraternity or whatever it is that young people are wanting to do. But yet we don't prioritize those goals as much. We prioritize the things that we think other people might be impressed by or other people expect of us. We don't prioritize the things that we're impressed by or that we expect of ourselves. And I wonder why, as humans, we don't do that, because surely what we think of ourselves is at least as important as what people who we don't know think about us.
Kind of going back to how you were saying it's a process and how we should be more present in where we are today and walking to the destination rather than just getting to the destination. What are ways that we can kind of take a deep breath and be present and feel okay with where we are rather than feeling like rushed to get to this next step? I kind of feel like young people feel this sort of rush, and like older generations are always like, it's okay, you have time. But young people are always constantly like, but I don't feel like I have time.
That's right.
How can we heal that?
This may sound like a cliched response and like the old man and the sort of saying, but I think we need to make peace with some amount of boredom.
Okay.
When I was growing up, like all of our best ideas happened because we were bored. Because we sat with ourselves, because we needed to figure out how we're going to spend our time. We allowed our minds to go certain places. The best ideas I have about my life or my work or my family happen when I'm not thinking about my life, my work, or my family. But have we created spaces for that? I noticed that when I used to drive, I would, come to a stop sign and I would sit there and I would think about things. And now I come to a traffic light and I check my phone, even in the car, like, oh, there's something, there's a text. It's too easy to go to our phones when we're bored. It's too easy to go to our phones when we're uncomfortable. It's too easy to go to our phones when there's a moment of quiet. What if we didn't do that? What if we just sat with the quiet, with the boredom, and saw where our mind took us? What if we allowed all the impulses that are coming through our phones to no longer sort of trigger us in a particular way. The reality is many of us, feel as though this is the worst time to ever live, even though it's the best time to ever live by most metrics. And it's because we're constantly doom scrolling all the worst news that's happening in real time in the world. And I don't think as human beings, we're oriented to processing that amount of bad news. I think actually as human beings, we're oriented towards joy and hope and aspiration. And yet the doom scrolling is just putting us in this negative downwards spiral that nothing is possible. Whereas if we just kind of take a break from all that, I think the human aspiration is that actually anything is possible. That's what it means to be human, is to have that belief, right?
Yeah.
And so I would say that even a little bit of digital detoxing can go a long way. Not comparing your real life to the Instagram ideal lives of others, not going for your phone in a moment of boredom, not being tethered to the worst news in the world, but instead looking for the best news of your life, right? Your greatest asset, your superpower, the thing that you should embrace more than anything else is the time that you have in your life. You're both billionaires. You may not yet be cash billionaires. I think you're on your way, but you're billionaires in something way more important than cash, which is time. You can make and lose money, but you can't make or lose time. And so I want you, your listeners, and all the young people out there, every morning when you wake up, to just have one thought every morning, which is, I am richer today than I will ever be again in my life in the most important asset that I have.
Yes.
And every day that's true. Every day you will have more time than you will ever have again. This idea that you actually have time, that is your asset. That is your greatest sort of resource. That is the thing that's your superpower. That's the thing that everyone would trade with you. And yet, if you don't feel like you have the thing that you actually do have in abundance, I think it's partly because the devices make us feel that way.
The device is just like, there's no end to it. You can go on different apps and scroll until literally like days go by.
These are very sophisticated algorithms designed by brilliant people to make us feel disconnected, alienated, pessimistic, angry, and sort of outraged, because that's what keeps us coming back. That's what keeps us coming back constantly. It's the negative stuff. And so we don't have to be, we don't have to play that algorithmic game. We can, if we feel like we're being manipulated, it's because we are being manipulated. And so just taking that break from that manipulation in the day gives you a sense of who you are, not who the world wants you to be, not who your friends think you should be, not who the algorithm thinks you should be. And so if part of what it means to be spiritually healthy is to find out who you really are, then cutting out the external noises by the sort of folks who are trying to tell you who you are can get you closer to who you actually are.
Yeah, I like how you just said, like, acknowledging that we are to an extent being manipulated, and like in acknowledging that you can kind of claim your power back and be like, hold on, let me just step away from this instead of just like falling victim to it again and again and again. Going back to what you were saying about boredom, I feel like that's super powerful. Just like the idea of like, it's okay to be bored. Some of our best ideas come when we're bored. Being bored isn't like the best feeling. I wouldn't say I'm like joyous when I'm bored, but I do sometimes just reflect on my life and where I am. And I think I have more moments of gratitude. I'm like, okay, I'm bored, but it's because like I have such a privileged life and I'm healthy and like I'm in a safe home that's like air conditioned and warm. So I feel like I see some of the benefits of boredom, but how does boredom benefit our mind?
It allows us to, like I said, think for ourselves as opposed to running off to the device that sort of tells us what to think. It can just be a space of ideation. We often think we know what we think, but we don't really know what we think until we actually articulate it or write it down. That's why this podcast is so important. We might think I know X, Y, and Z, but when you try to articulate it, say it out loud, write it down, teach it to someone else, then you really know whether you know it or not.
That's
when you have to articulate it. And so what you're doing is you're giving voice in your podcast to a lot of these abstract ideas, but by giving voice to it, you give a reality to it. And so if you're bored and you just have like a paper and a pen and you're starting to brainstorm or write down ideas, suddenly you're giving voice or a reality to something that had no space to come out otherwise. We lived a cluttered life. And so having some boredom gives us a moment of what it might feel like to live an uncluttered life. And most people throughout human history lived uncluttered lives. They didn't have constant stimuli or bombardment. For most of human history, we didn't know about every terrible thing that was happening in real time at every part of the world. So there was still, as part of the human experience, an aspiration to hope. And, when we move from a performance-based mindset to a purpose-based mindset, we move from finding the right answers to finding the right questions. We're all here because we know we've had the right answers to every test. We've had the right answers to every exam, every interview question, every sponsor has asked you something. You've had the right answers. You're like perfect at the right answers. But what are the right questions? I think the right questions are the questions that all human beings have asked themselves in some way or another. What it means to be human is to ask these questions. These are probably questions animals don't ask. It's a differentiating factor. They're questions that AI doesn't ask. These are existential questions. These are questions like, who am I? What does my life mean? What matters to me? Why does it matter to me? How do I live an authentic life? How do I translate my values into action? Who do I love? How do I love? Like, these are questions that every human asks in some way or another, but we don't have the space to explicitly ask or answer or reflect or interrogate these questions. And by the way, the answers change. The answer to who am I changes at 20 and 30 and 40. And unfortunately for my wife, I can keep going with those numbers. It should change. If I'm the same person at 40 than I was at 20, then I'm doing something wrong, right? But the question, who am I, doesn't change. We look for anchors in our life, and we feel like if we find the right answers, we're going to have an answer for our life, an anchor. But that's not true. The answers to the most important questions, the existential questions, change. The questions don't change. And so where do we have the space to even interrogate these questions, live and breathe and wrestle with these questions? It's when we are bored, when we turn off our devices, when we go out into this beautiful yard without the phone, but with a sketch pad, and sit there for an hour in the sun and see what happens. See what happens.
I was listening to a podcast once, and they were saying how, like, in school, we're taught to provide the answers to questions. That's how we learn, instead of learning how to ask questions, which is more powerful. I think, like, all of the best things that have been invented and anything that a human has created has started with a question.
Yep. Like I said, I think of all the questions we ask ourselves, the most important one that all humans have to ask themselves, that, like I said, animals don't ask themselves and AI won't ask itself, is who am I?
Yeah.
And who am I is a dynamic question, and those answers should and will change. But where do we even ask ourselves that question? Where do we even ask ourselves the question of who am I really? Ease is a place where you're asking yourself that question. That's why it's so important, because you're normalizing this idea that we should be asking the question of who am I? You're socializing this idea that this is what it means to be human. You're affirming that if you're asking that question, you're doing something right? And so just the act of asking the question, who am I believe, is what it means to have a spiritual life. Just ask that question. Religion is about answers. Spirituality is about the questions. But we have to live the questions. So if you ask yourself, who am I? Then that is a spiritual question. That is a spiritual experience. That is a spiritual journey that you begin.
If people ask themselves, who am I? Like, if I just thought, like, who am I? The first answer that came to my mind was like, well, I'm a kind person and I'm a good daughter. I almost feel like there's something deeper with that question.
Yeah. Why don't we do this exercise, actually? Why don't we ask ourselves these questions? And first, I want to ask you a question, who am I? And I'll do it 3 or 4 times. And I want you to give me an answer that's based on the identity that you might have. So who are you?
I'm a sister.
Who are you?
I'm a friend.
Who are you?
I'm a girl.
Who are you?
I'm here.
You're here.
Yeah.
Now, there's another way to answer this question, and maybe you can ask me 3 or 4 times, who am I?
Who are you?
I am hopeful.
Okay, who are you?
I am joyful.
Who are you?
I am grateful.
Who are you really?
I am compassionate, right? So I think there are ways to ask and answer this question where it's an identity. I am a dean, a professor, a father, a son. These are the masks that I wear for other people throughout my day. But when I take off the mask, who am I? Well, then there's another way to ask that. I am joyful. I am grateful. I am concerned. I am, curious, right? That's a different way of identifying with the question of who am I? It took me a long time to figure it out, but it shouldn't have. And this is what I learned living in a monastery and from some of my teachers. is I always thought that our words describe our reality, right? I always thought that, especially at university, when we use words, we're trying to describe the universe. We're trying to describe phenomenon. We're trying to describe why things happen. But that's not true. Our words do not describe our reality, I've learned. Our words create our reality. They create our reality. We become what we say we are. And so if I am telling myself, who am I? I am hopeful. I am joyful. I am curious. That is going to create my reality of who I am. If all of our words are of impossibility, of I can't do this, of I'm not worthy, then that's the reality we live in. We've created that for ourselves. We can create a different reality for ourselves. And ultimately what this comes down to is the power of storytelling in our own life. So where do I find some kind of constant across my life when everything is changing? When the only thing permanent is impermanence and the only constants is change? Where do I find something, an anchor? It's in the storytelling of who I am. It's in the words that I tell myself about who I am, because that creates the reality of who I become. And so we should feel like fully empowered to tell the story of who we want to be. I always tell students, it's not about nurture or nature, it's about narrative. That's where you have power. That's where you can form your own identity. You might not have chosen who you were born to or how you were raised, but you choose the story that you tell about yourself.
I really relate to what you just said because 2 years ago, I went through like a really hard patch in my life. And I remember I used to be super self-deprecating. And it was like a way of just like making jokes about myself and like being lighthearted. I thought I was just being funny. And I would just always say things like, oh my God, I'm so dumb. Like, oh, I can't do this. Like, I didn't realize the power of my words. But at that time when I was like making self-deprecating jokes, I had really low self-esteem. Now I have completely like rewired my brain and I no longer like utter bad words about myself because I really do believe in the power of the tongue and just like speaking life into yourself, and also the beliefs that you hold create your life, your reality. To people who don't really see the correlation of like, okay, when I speak and say things, how do my words create my world? How can we make that digestible for someone who doesn't really see the correlation in that?
One of the things that people can do is to put this into action in their own life. And what we know is that it basically takes 21 days to change a habit or a muscle memory. That's why everyone has like the 21-day weight challenge, the 21-day meditation challenge, the 21-day anything, right? If you go to the gym for 21 days, on the 22nd day, you're going to have muscle memory. It's going to feel a lot different. 21 days might be hard, but the 22nd day won't be.
Yeah.
The mind is also a muscle. It has muscle memory. And so people can try an exercise where for 21 days, they're changing the words they tell about themselves. And if they feel a change, then that becomes the truth in their life. And English, I think, does us a disservice because just of the way the language is. We say things like, I am hungry, whereas in Spanish, you would say, I have hunger, right? So when you say, I am hungry, I am angry, I am thirsty, that becomes my ego. That becomes fundamentally who I am. That's who I am. I am angry. Now I have to play this role of the angry person. Oh, that's what. And so I think when we keep saying, I am sad, I am this, I am that, English language itself creates the relationship with the ego that's actually who I am. And other languages don't necessarily do that. And so we have to be especially careful, I think, as English speakers, that whenever we say I'm hungry, I'm angry, I'm sad, we understand that I'm not actually hungry, angry, or sad. I'm just experiencing hunger, anger, or sadness in this moment. But I'm not fundamentally, that's not my root identity, is anger.
Yeah. Going back to what you were saying about how we all are on our phones more and we are on social media much more. Sometimes people do feel a sense of loneliness. Loneliness is a topic that we hear a lot about nowadays, and we feel it more than everything. And even though we're talking to a bunch of people at the same time, it feels like we don't have a connection with each other as much as we can. Do you have any advice for how we can feel more connected?
I find in 2019, I wrote a LA Times op-ed. It was called "The Real Crisis on College Campuses is Loneliness." And I was surprised to get emails from all over the world, calls from all over the world telling me that what I'm seeing at USC, people are seeing across the board.
Wow.
And at that time, there's a health group called Cigna, and they said that the loneliest people in the United States were 18 to 24-year-olds. That's the first time we'd seen that. Normally, the loneliest people in the United States are older Americans. We know that extreme loneliness is a cause for premature death. We know that being extremely lonely is the equivalent of smoking a pack of cigarettes a day, that there's a public health aspect. We knew that for older people, and we tried to sort of create programs where older people had companionship so they wouldn't feel that loneliness. But we've never seen it with 18 to 24-year-olds. So it's the age of our college students.
Yeah.
And I saw it every day on my campus that, students were here with 50,000 people their age, and they're asking me, the old man on the corner of campus, like, how do I meet people? Like, you have 50,000 people here. How do you not meet people? But I began to see that this was an epidemic that wasn't just a USC epidemic, but a generational one. And then, of course, it got exacerbated during COVID, where a lonely generation got torn apart even more. We have lost a sense of human connection. And I see this in two ways. I see the loss of religion as one factor. Historically, the way we were in community was religious community. That was a place where people with shared values got together, and we told stories, and we sang songs, and we had an ethical framework, and we had these life rituals that memorialized life and death and marriage and, coming of age and all these other things. And we replaced it with social media, which is focused on disconnection, anxiety, aggravation. And then we wonder why everyone's so lonely. One remedy for loneliness is human connection. And it's harder and harder to find genuine human connection. We no longer bowl together. We no longer go to religious services together. We no longer have, veterans groups or these other kind of social groups that we used to have. And as a result, young people no longer date as much. They don't drive as much. They're not out of the house as much. What I tell students is you only need 3 ride or die friends who have your back in real life. I don't care how many friends you have online, because honestly, the students who have 100,000 friends online are also lonely and also in my office talking to me about how lonely they are, and feel even worse that they have all these. They're so, online, they're so popular, but in real life, they're so lonely, right? All you need are 3 people. 3 people who are non-judgmental, who have your back, who you don't have to wear a mask around, who you can be anything around. We don't need more than that. And if you have those 3 people and you can spend time with those 3 people, you're going to feel less and less lonely. I think part of it is changing your context, and part of it is changing your relationship with yourself.
I think, very often people believe and associate their emotions and every thought that they have with who they are,
Yes.
rather than it just being an emotion or a thought.
But it can be liberating to realize that I am not my thoughts and I am not my emotions. I have a lot of thoughts and emotions today. I'm going to have totally different thoughts and emotions tomorrow. I'm not a fundamentally different person tomorrow.
That's true.
It's just that I'm not my thoughts and my emotions. And when I don't have to be my thoughts and my emotions, it's liberating. When I can say to myself, like I said, that's what anger looks like, not I am angry. That's what sadness feels like, not I am sad. That's liberating, because tomorrow I can feel something else, and I don't have to be attached to this narrative that I told myself about who I am. Sometimes when we get into defending, I am angry and that's who I am and no one can tell me otherwise and blah, blah, blah. And then it's almost like defending like a diamond in the closet. Someone tells you, you have this diamond in the closet, and your whole life you're like, no one can talk smack about this diamond, and no one can come near. I'll kill you if you come near my diamond. How dare you look at my diamond? And then you open the closet and there's no diamond. Well, you can be, of course, that can feel depressing, or it can feel liberating. Oh, I don't need to do any of this. That's the ego. Like, I don't need to protect any of the things around my ego that associates with thoughts and emotions, because I'm not my thoughts and emotions.
Yeah, I'm someone that I spend a lot of time alone. I'm constantly by myself. I grew up an only child, so maybe that's part of why I feel comfort in being alone. I've had moments where I'm alone and I get a sudden wave of loneliness, and I'm like, oh my God, I'm physically alone, so I'm alone in this world. I've started to practice challenging those thoughts, and almost not to sound corny, but rewiring those thoughts to be something positive, instead of this doom that you feel when you feel lonely.
Yeah.
But another thing that I feel I can sometimes deal with is I find comfort in being by myself, because I feel I'm able to just tune into what makes me feel at peace, what makes me feel happy. But when I start listening to too much outside, these are my beliefs, people saying this is what I think, this is how I feel, this is how I view the world.
Yeah.
I almost start to shrink in how I that security that I feel when I'm alone.
Yeah.
And I don't know why. I feel that's something I need to explore and figure out.
Well, maybe part of the reason you're doing this podcast is for that very reason, right? Is to be able to wrestle with these questions in a way that makes sense for you. Not everyone will encounter this in the same way. So how other people might interpret things or frame things might not be the way that you do. But when you're hanging around a lot of people, you tend to, it becomes easy to think, well, if everyone thinks X and I think Y, then maybe I should be thinking X too. So you begin to have a little bit of doubt or what have you. It's mostly a process, but what you said is really important, which is feeling is a type of knowing. For most of my life, I just assumed that the way to really know something is to think it. I thought that we were cognitive beings who sometimes feel, but I don't think that anyway. Now I feel like we are emotional beings who sometimes think. I think the higher order of knowing is feeling, not actually knowing something, an idea, but feeling something. Bob Marley said, "Who feels it knows it." And the other thing I'll say is that when I was living in a Buddhist monastery, I learned something that has kind of shaped my life since then, which is the first noble truth. When the Buddha became enlightened, he gave these teachings and he gave these 4 truths. And the first thing he said after he became the Buddha is the first truth. And that is that life is suffering, or there is suffering. That doesn't mean that life is always suffering, but it does mean that to live is to suffer. And as I get older, I realize that that is absolutely true. Everyone who has ever lived has suffered. And almost everyone who has ever lived doesn't want to suffer. So one of what it means to be human is that we suffer, but we don't want to suffer, right? If I am suffering, that's normal. That's what it means to be human. There's nothing wrong with it. That's baseline. And if I'm not suffering, I'm doing something right. And so having a healthier relationship with suffering as baseline and not trying to pathologize or diagnose it as something wrong with you, but as just a full experience of what it means to be human. And because you're having those experiences of loneliness, it means you also have the experience of connection. Because you're having an experience of scarcity means you also have the experience of abundance. Because you feel sadness means you also feel joy, right? Those things are inseparable. We can't have one without the other. And so, of course, no one wants to suffer. And it's hard to feel grateful for it. But I think it's important not to pathologize it as something wrong with you, but rather as a fundamental truth of the human experience.
For people who are struggling to listen to their intuition, what is some advice that you might give to really listen rather than just listening to what you might think other people may want?
Yeah. What I encourage students to do is to clear the mind, like turn off their devices, spend a little time in an uncluttered way, maybe even a little bit bored, and see where your mind naturally goes. When you're not thinking about work, when you're not thinking about school, when you're not thinking about stress, X, Y, and Z, where does your mind go? Sometimes our mind will go to a place that tells us something about ourselves. It'll go to a happy place or a safe place or a sacred space. If when I'm not thinking about work, I'm thinking about my kids, then that's my sacred space. Maybe intuitively I shouldn't be at work. I should be with my kids, right? So I think our mind will tell us something if we just kind of watch where it goes. It'll tell us what's important to us. When students are asking me about career stuff, I say, if you didn't have to work for money, what would you do? That also tells you a little bit about your sacred place, your intuition, where your mind wants to go, where you might thrive or flourish. What open door might you push on as opposed to pushing on closed doors? When you're pushing on closed doors, oftentimes the universe is telling you something. When you're pushing on open doors, it's telling you something else, right? And so I think being in tune with your intuition means you end up pushing on open doors. But how do you know what doors to push on? Well, if you're asking yourself, when I'm not thinking about work or home, where does my mind go? Or if I didn't have to work for money, what would I do? That tells you something about what door might be open for you.
I love that. It seems like to find your intuition, it takes a while to really listen to your gut. And I think there's been a couple times in my life where I feel like I haven't listened to my gut. Sometimes it's hard to distinct a fear and if that fear is rational versus if it is your intuition.
Right.
Yeah.
You're right. Sometimes we feel things that it seems like for a reason. I often think about random people that I haven't thought about, and the next day they'll call me. Like, it
Right.
happens
That
a
actually
lot.
happened
It
to me
happens. At this
yesterday.
point, whenever I think of someone, I'm like, oh, they're going to call me.
They're gonna text me. Yeah.
So I think there's something about being open to that. And yet you're right. We don't want to go down this fear-based rabbit hole where what we think is intuition is just a fear-based response to everything. Because the reality is why this is so hard for us is because we're going against hundreds of thousands of years of biological programming. The reason we are still alive as a species is because we have fight, flight, or freeze mechanisms.
Right.
Whenever we're confronted by any challenge, we either fight, we flight, we run away, or we freeze, right? And, maybe it used to be that we were fighting, like saber-toothed tigers and we needed to fight, flight, or freeze. But now we have the same reaction if someone gets our latte order wrong, right? The reaction is the same, even though the trigger is not the same. And so what it means to kind of be spiritually healthy in some ways is to transcend our own biological impulses that have kept us alive as a civilization. And that's really hard to do. That's moving from the sympathetic nervous system to the parasympathetic nervous system. None of us would be sitting at this table right now if we didn't follow our intuition to some extent. There's no reason for me to study religion. I come from a family with 12 physicians. My PhD in religion means nothing to any of them. Like, it just didn't make any sense for me to do it. But intuition kind of pushed me in this way. There's probably no reason for both of you to be doing a podcast. It would have been a lot easier for you to be a accountant, a physician, a lawyer, because there's a path. There is no path to what you're doing. You have an incredible amount of a risk that you're taking, an incredible amount of faith that you have in the process, and an incredible amount of hard work to do something that people haven't done in the past. I would give yourself credit that your intuition has brought you here. This is clearly what you should be doing. There was no path to do it. You had to swim upstream to do it. And yet I feel like this is absolutely what the both of you should be doing. If you weren't intuitive, you wouldn't have done it. And so I think it's easy to feel like we're not intuitive in a day-to-day setting. But when you zoom out and you look at the trajectory of your life, your intuition has kind of brought you to where you are right now. And if you like where you are right now, everything had to happen the way it happened for you to be here.
We know what we're doing is for a purpose, but to hear it really means a lot. So thank you.
We know that you're working on a book, and we know that it's a North Star and an inner compass. What are the difference between the two, and what is a North Star?
Yeah, I think a North Star, there are a lot of ways to think about North Star. When you think about your true North or North Star, you think about where a compass is pointing. So I like this metaphor that we all have an internal compass. It's pointing in a particular direction. That direction is what we might consider a true North or North Star. With a compass, you never actually get to true North. True North, you get closer and closer. I think that's the way it is with us as humans. So I think of true North as purpose, but different people call it different things. In India, we call it dharma. In France, you would call it raison d'être. There are different, it's a reason for being. It's what gets you up in the morning. It's what is sacred to you, right? It doesn't have to be God, doesn't have to be religion, but I think what it means to be human is to have something that's sacred to you. This podcast can be that thing. If this podcast is sacred to you, well, that makes sense because you have a community around it. You're talking about meaning and purpose. You're talking about things that really matter. You have rituals that make up the day, So if it's sacred to you, then you can treat it as something sacred to you, right? And so I think the North Star is what is sacred to you. I think it's the thing that gets us up in the morning, not the thing that keeps us up at night. And we all have some sense of that. We all have an impulse, or we all have some idea that a voice in our head or something pushing us in a particular direction. We just have to have a more comfortable relationship with that. The book is really about 3 questions. And the 3 questions that I think we can all ask ourselves about how we get to our dharma, our purpose, our raison d'etre, our North Star, whatever we want to call it, is by asking 3 questions. The first question I already talked about is the question of time. We all have, especially young people, are time billionaires. So the question is, how do you spend your time? How do you want to spend your time? And how do you close the gap between how you spend your time and how you want to spend your time? Because how you spend your time versus how you want to spend your time tells you a lot about what's sacred to you. How you want to spend your time tells you about what's important to you. I call it the 3 T's because they're all T's. So the first T is time. The second T is tribe. We all know from every data study, every research study, the Harvard Grant study, which is the longest longitudinal study of human development ever, tells us this, that at the end of your life, the one thing that's going to make you feel as though you lived a life worth living was how deep are your loving relationships, period. Relationships, relationships, relationships. So the second T is tribe. Who are my people? Who do I spend my time with? Like, who are my 3 ride or die friends, right? Who are the people that I want to walk alongside? And the third T is transcendence. What takes my breath away? What are the moments where you forget about all the masks that you're wearing? What are the moments where it's just about you? Like, how do you get to that moment? Those 3 T's tell us a little bit about what's sacred to us, about what our purpose is. So those are questions we can always ask ourselves that get us closer to our true north.
Practicing gratitude is super important, but also I kind of feel like that in itself, time, tribe, and transcendence, acknowledging that, you're almost able to be more grateful for the moments where you have that. As young people, we're always kind of like asking ourselves, like, what's our purpose? What am I here for? What am I doing to contribute? Am I doing this right? And we're just so caught up in like what we should be doing, where we want to get to, that it's easy to overlook where we are right now. This podcast, I feel like, is the perfect combination of time, tribe, and transcendence for me. And I think I didn't acknowledge that until you said that.
And if that's true, then like I said, then honor the podcast like that. The podcast is what gets you up in the morning. It's what's sacred to you. It gives you a sense of your true north. It allows you to fulfill time, tribe, and transcendence, right? It is a source of joy for you, of hope, of inspiration. So the things that people might find in religion or sports or music or whatever you're finding right here in your podcast, that's great. But I would honor it as something sacred.
I feel like in life we're taught to think about ourselves and the way that we act with other people, the way that we carry ourselves. I almost feel like there is a disconnect between the physical versions of ourselves and how we present ourselves and who we truly are deep in our core. How can we break that down and make that just seem more like digestible and accessible? Because that's already like a big idea.
Yeah, I think part of the idea of ego or wearing different masks for different situations is functional. Like, we can't always be our true selves in every situation. We have jobs to do, we have roles to play, we have work to do. We have to be in the world, right? And if we're just like, I am joy, I am hope, I am possibility, then who's going to pay the bills and who's going to pick up the kids and who's going to feed and walk the dog? Like, there are things we have to do also. There are roles that we have to play. So we're in this situation where we have different masks that we wear, or an ego that is functional in the world for a reason. And yet when we operate that way, we tend to believe that is our true self, that the ego, the mask, is actually who we are. It's not just a way of us operating in the world. And so the ego is the projected sense of self. It's what we project out to the world. It's what the world sees of us. But it might not be what we see of ourselves, or it might not be the person that we think we really are. Oftentimes it's ego that is focused on vanity or on comparison or on desire, on the things that ultimately have no end. It's focused on the itch that can never really be scratched, because there's no end to desire. There's no end to vanity. There's no end to comparison. Sometimes ego is a substitute for a sense of permanence in a world where there isn't permanence too. Like, this is who I am. My ego is who I am over time. Now I can have some anchor or some sense of self. When the reality is, we're always changing, we're constantly changing, our identities are fluid, our life is a journey, not a destination. So ego can give us a false sense of permanence in a reality that is impermanent as well.
Yeah.
So how do we get to what is real versus what is ego? That is what spirituality is, I think, and that's ultimately what religion is. What every religion will tell you in some way or another is that you are not who you think you are.
Yeah.
The Buddhists would say, you think you're a human, but you're actually a Buddha. The Hindus would say, you think you're a human, but you're actually God. Christians might say, you think you're a human, but you're actually a child of God. Judaism will tell us, you think you're an individual, but you're actually part of a tribe. So I think at the heart of every religion is this idea that we are not our egos. We're not our projected selves. There's something deeper about who we are. And what it means to be religious or spiritual is to find that thing. That's a lifelong journey to get to who you are. And because that idea of who I am keeps changing, even when I might feel like I got there, I don't live there. I'm constantly on this journey. Part of who we are is the journey of finding out who we are. Having a distance between the ego, knowing that this is what the world might see, my persona, my projection. I mean, both of you are in the public sphere. You have online sort of personalities. You mean a lot to people who you will never meet. And so a lot of people have a perception of who you are. That is probably not who you are or who you think you are. And yet people have this perception because of the work you do in the world. And if they didn't have that perception, you wouldn't be as successful as podcasters. So I think the idea of ego or the projected self has to be a functional idea. How can I use this to achieve my goals rather than how can I become this? Right? How do I use my platform not just to have a bigger platform? How do I use my celebrity not just to have more celebrity? How do I use my spotlight not just to have more spotlight, but to actually shine a light on something, on others, on ideas, on issues, on communities, on people, right? I think that's how we do it in a more healthy way. If the ego is just about us, then we chase the rabbit hole of vanity, desire, and greed and comparison. The moment of transcendence is not an ego-based moment. It's when the mask is off. It's when you're not being anything to anyone other than yourself. My moments of transcendence happen when I'm biking or hiking and I'm not talking to anyone, thinking about anyone. That is where I feel like I'm in my true self. And that is more of a feeling than an idea.
If we are taught to prioritize the mask that we put out, the way that we express ourselves, I know you said there's no pressure to understand, who we really are. How do we even begin to understand that? How do we find a connection with that and deepen that?
Yeah, that's the ultimate question. It's interesting. The number one thing that scientists tell us will make us feel as though we're thriving and flourishing is not meditation, not prayer, not hiking, not communing with nature. Even those are all really important. Do you know what it is?
What? Medicine.
Dancing.
Oh, okay.
So if you really want to taste what your true self is, put on a song that you love and dance like no one is watching. Wow. Dancing is a whole level higher as a human experience to get to sort of a true self of thriving and flourishing than any other human activity.
Wow.
Yeah,
I would not think it was dancing of all things.
Dance. We all need to dance more is really the takeaway here.
I feel like in today's world, we were talking about how it feels very cluttered. There's a lot going on, so much to think about, especially with technology nowadays. We're seeing so much and taking in so much. We know that not everyone has the privilege to slow down and reflect or, quote unquote, go find themselves. Because for some people, survival is what takes priority. They're trying to pay their bills and feed their families. So how can we make room for personal growth while also acknowledging the reality of our circumstances?
Yeah, that's great. That's a really good question. There's a famous psychologist, Abraham Maslow, who created this pyramid called the hierarchy of needs. And at the top of the pyramid, he said, what we all want is self-actualization. But what are the building blocks to get there, to know who we are? Well, at the very bottom, you need food and shelter and security. And then you need a sense of community and belonging and worth. And then at the very top is self-actualization. So in some ways, what he's saying is that self-actualization is a class-based luxury. The fact that we can even have a conversation about who am I means that we're not having conversations about where's my next meal coming from? How am I going to support my family? How do I find shelter, right? Because if we were having those conversations about just subsiding, then we might not get to the conversation about self-actualization. So I think the fact that we can have these conversations is a great blessing. It's a luxury, but it's a blessing. We should take it as a blessing and not a burden. We shouldn't feel guilty about it. We should feel grateful that we are actually able to have these conversations. I'll also say that, my wife's from South Africa and I'm from India, and we've seen abject poverty in ways that you probably wouldn't see in the United States. And that's part of our lived experience. And I always marveled that even when I was in the most sort of devastating conditions of poverty in India, and my wife has seen something similar in South Africa, we still saw joy though. We still saw joy, you know, you still see the kids smiling in the shanty towns, in the tenement yards. You still see communities celebrating when they have very little to celebrate. And sometimes I see that even more in the sort of poorest parts of the world than I see it in the richest parts of the world, you know?
I like joy is our birthright. That really stuck with me.
Yeah.
We're moving into audience questions. We asked our audience to ask questions that they had on their mind about life, purpose, and inner experience. Caller number 1 said, I had a gut feeling my ex wasn't right for me, but I ignored it until he hurt me deeply. Why is my intuition always right about men, but I still ignore it?
Is that my wife who wrote that? Well, it's because it's hard to translate the gut. The gut has a different language. It's a feeling. It's not like a pro-cons list. So if you're in a relationship, you go like, here are the pros of this relationship. Here are the cons. I can articulate it. I can make an argument. I can make a creed. But like I said, I think ultimately we're not cognitive beings who sometimes feel. We're emotional beings who sometimes think. And the real way of knowing is feeling. But we have been in school for, 20 straight years, and all we were taught was how to articulate what we thought, never how to articulate what we felt. And so I think part of it is a translation challenge we all have around the gut. And it's trying to translate that into some kind of pros cons list when actually it's just a feeling. And I think you have to just trust your gut. When they say trust your gut, it's like trust that feeling. Even if you can't pro and con it, just trust it. And the most important decisions, like I said, are going to come from your gut. And there's probably no more important decision in your life than your relationships. And especially if you are looking for a life partner, that is the most important relationship in your life. You don't choose your parents, you don't choose your siblings, you don't choose your teachers, you don't really choose your employers, but you choose your life partner, right? And so that's the most important decision you'll make. And I think it has to be a gut decision. I think part of the reason why we ignore our gut is because we're not taught how to interpret our gut. We're always trying to articulate something. Even asking a question about the gut is trying to articulate it. When in fact, I think the real way to feel that intuition is just trust the gut.
Yeah.
Trust it, even if you don't know where it's going. It's the idea of faith. Have faith in the intelligence of your gut. Like it carries within it the DNA of all of human history. There's intelligence there. It's just a different kind of intelligence. Martin Luther King said, faith is taking the first step even when you don't see the staircase. That's what it is with the gut.
Oh,
Yeah, trust the
okay.
feeling.
I always thought that in order to tap into your intuition, you have to just like silence your mind, and that's how you could listen
But
to
that's
it.
that's something that's part of the sort of feeling the gut and not just the mind. She could probably have 1,000 reasons why she should stay with him that are intellectual, cerebral, that she can articulate, that she can write down. But her gut's telling her something different. But because she can see these 1,000 reasons why she should stay, she's living in the mind.
Right.
But if you quiet the mind, then suddenly you may be able to feel the gut more.
Because feelings, you feel a feeling before you can, intellectualize.
Caller number 2 says, I ate lunch alone because my friends spent it with a girl I didn't feel good about. How do you trust your gut about friends when you might feel a certain way about someone and everyone else loves them?
Yeah. So once again, I would trust your gut because there's some intelligence that's telling you something there, your inner voice or whatever you want to call it. That doesn't mean you necessarily have to isolate yourself or be disconnected from other people who feel differently. There could be a way where all of it could be possible, that I don't trust this person, but that doesn't mean I can't hang out with other people who that person hangs out with, or expect other people to act on my intuition if they don't feel the same thing. And it's certainly important not to carry around any grudges because of that, because that is not just a way to punish yourself. When we're talking about what other people may or may not do or how that may interact with our feelings or our values, the most important thing is not to carry the grudge. Forgiveness is something we do for ourselves. It's not something we do for anyone else. We tend to think that I'm going to forgive you. That's my gift to you. No. That's my gift to me. Because now I don't have to carry around anxiety, negative emotions, a grudge. By not forgiving you, I've given you the person that, I might not even want to hang out with, access to my inner spiritual core, which is the most sacred part of me. Why would I give the hater the thing that's most sacred to me? By forgiving that person, I've released myself from having to carry the burden of, this negative emotion to someone who I don't really even want in my life.
Yeah, because it kind of like shackles you a little bit.
If I don't want to even hang out with this person, why should I let them into my heart and my soul and my mind? Why should I carry them with me? I don't even want to hang out with them in real life. Why should I carry them with me throughout my life?
Yeah. Okay. This is our third and final question. Caller number 3 said, I graduated from college recently and I haven't applied for jobs or had interviews yet, but I keep overthinking, what do I want?
Yeah.
Should I get a job related to my major even if I'm not passionate about it? Or should I work somewhere that doesn't drain me even if the salary is low? How do I navigate feeling anxiety and resentment towards adulthood?
A lot of what I see with students, either when they're coming to college or they're graduating from college, is I have to get this decision right.
Yeah.
I have to get it right. If I don't make the right decision, I won't have the right life. But that gives all the power to the decision and takes away all the power from you. And so what I tell students is, for college or for jobs, but let's just use college as an example, there are no right decisions when it comes to college. There are no right decisions. There are only decisions that we make right. Going to USC is not the right decision for the students who go to USC, unless they make it the right decision. That's where I have power. That's where I can storytell. That's where I have agency. Otherwise, I'm either getting it right or not. My life is just a bunch of random decisions that I have to get right, or I can't live the life I want. That's totally disempowering. When it comes to what do you want to do, ask the question that we talked about earlier, which is, if you didn't have to work for money, what would you do? Now, how do you do that and make money? A lot of people will reverse engineer it. They'll say, what is the job that'll make me the most money? How do I go get that job and then make meaning out of it? A lot of our students will go into finance, like a huge number of students go into finance, not because they dreamt of finance, but because that's where they think they can pay down the debt that they've taken to get their degree. But I encourage students to reverse engineer it. What brings me joy? And let me go do that. Because if something brings me joy, I'm going to be really good at it.
Okay, so for our final question, we like to connect this question back to ease. So how can rediscovering our true self through remembering who we were before life shaped us and before all the noise got to us, how can that bring us ease?
When you're in a flow state, when you feel like you're in touch with your intuition, when your compass is pointing to true north, when you feel as though you're able to create purpose in your life and tell the story about who you want to be, then doors open for you. And they open with ease. And if you're opening those doors with ease, that means you're doing something right. I would pay attention to that. If you keep banging your head against a closed door and no matter what, it's not opening, it's maybe the universe telling you that there's a different door that you're supposed to walk through. And Bob Marley said, when one door closes, many others are open. He didn't say when one door closes, another door is open. When one door closes, a multiplicity, an infinite amount of other doors open. A whole world of possibilities, not possibility, but possibilities open, right? And so I think what you're talking about is being in touch with your true self, finding out, who you really are, and how you channel your intuition. When you're able to do that, then those doors open with ease. When you have a sense of ease, like the right doors are opening at the right time with the right people, then it means you're doing something really right. And we just have to be in touch with that reality. We have to believe that that's true, and we have to see things as happening for us as opposed to us. And suddenly the doors will open with ease.
Wow.
Yeah. Wow. That was so good. I
really
love
good.
that. I love the idea that the universe has our back and believing that the universe loves us.
There's a great Jewish text that says, for every blade of grass, there's an angel praying over it saying, grow, grow, grow. Think about that.
Wow.
As the universe having your back.
Wow. We're the blade of grass.
We all have angels overseeing us, encouraging us to grow.
Yeah. Wow, I have chills. Thank you so much for this conversation and
Thank
for
you.
sharing all of your wisdom.
Thank you. Well, Martin Luther King said that our lives begin to end the day we stop talking about things that matter. You are talking about things that matter at a time when it matters most. So this is real service. You're doing incredible work in the world. I'm really proud of you and grateful for this opportunity. And I know your audience is too. So if we could, unfortunately, these mics are attached to the table. Otherwise, I say it's time for you to drop your mic because you really went deep today, and we need to go deep. So thank you for that.
Thank you so much. Thank you for all the work and service that you're doing as well. We really admire you, and I hope to be as wise as you one day.
Yeah, no, same. You just brought so much comfort to us, and I'm sure everyone who's listening too. So thank you.